This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. A very special guest kicks off this Tuesday's program. Longtime voice of Agriculture Today, Eric Atkinson, joins us for a year in review of 2022's biggest agricultural stories. Also ahead, K-State horticulturalist Ward Upham discusses control methods to combat the spread of Bush Honeysuckle, an invasive shrub that can be a problem for homeowners in native habitats. Also, K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond passes along some winter weather safety tips that you're not going to want to miss. We end with this year's final edition of Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. He discusses the differences between the two measurements for energy content in grassy hays, alfalfa, and other legumes, RFV and RFQ. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by a very special guest and a familiar voice for many of you that are regular listeners of Agriculture Today. And he is the former voice of Agriculture Today, and I'm sure in the hearts of many, still the voice of Ag Today. And his name is Eric Atkinson, and he has been so kind to come and join us for a conversation. So
thank you for the invitation. So
yeah.
It's good to be back in the studio. It's a little weird, as I've told you before we went on the air, being on this side of the microphone. But I'll do my best to cater to your needs here in this interview.
Sure. Well, to be fair, I did offer you could sit in this seat if you wanted to.
Nope. Left that 5.5 months ago. So that's your seat over there. So yeah.
Fair. Well, Eric, before we get into our conversation, I invited you in today to talk about the biggest stories of 2022, because honestly, who else better to cover that than the person that was producing majority of them for this year? Before we do that, though, I wanted to update listeners on how you've been, because like you said, it's been over 5 months now at this point that they last heard from you.
Now pushing half a year. Been just fine, thank you. Spend a lot of time working on the place that I, along with my wife, Ron, to live on in western Buncey County, doing a few thises and that's, replacing fence posts and fixing up things of that nature that have been wanting for some time. So lots of little chores like that to do. Spend some recreational time playing a little golf when it's favorable, which it isn't now. It's still involved in the local volunteer fire department and such. So finding plenty of things to do, to be certain.
Wonderful. Well, I know you haven't completely lost your love for broadcasting at this point, and you've found a way to incorporate that still in your time today.
It's a venture that I wanted to start, and I started to think about it as I was approaching retirement, which was on June the 10th, I guess it was. And that was to extend an opportunity for farm and ranch families to capture the memories of the family farm and ranch from their elders via an audio recording. And that's sort of getting started now. Several inquiries have taken place. The scheduling is still not squared away yet as far as getting together with those who've inquired about that. But it's something that was a spin-off, or is a spin-off, I should say, from things that we did with the Master Farmer, Master Farm Homemaker program and interviewing those couples. So I am still availing myself for that. If anybody is interested in doing that, capturing those memories, why, agguy@ksu.edu. I can be emailed and we can go from there.
Excellent. Well, that's such a great opportunity for people to document memories of their loved ones and also their family history in a lot of ways, for sure. But Eric, now that we've kind of caught up with you, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what we wanted to discuss today, 2022. It was an eventful year in hindsight.
It always is.
Yeah.
There's always something going on. Really, if you keep it to the Kansas perspective or the Central Plains perspective, it's fairly obvious what the biggest ag story of 2022 was and is, unfortunately, and that is the drought. Of course, you have spoken about this during your tenure on Ag Today with several of our folks here at K-State and otherwise about the impacts on the markets, on productivity, and it's something that's going to take a little while to dig out of. As you know, Samantha, here in the eastern part of the state where we reside, we've been a little more blessed with moisture than our brethren in western Kansas. And you don't have to go that far west to find folks that are really, really hurting for moisture yet. And this is the third year or better of drought for those folks with La Nina. It speaks to the resiliency of people. I guess that's the part of the story I enjoy talking about, because folks are finding a way. They're finding it through risk management tools. They're finding it through just due diligence, planning, economizing where they can. But it's going to be with us a while. And to that, you have done interviews, and I have previously, with our folks here at K-State who are working on the drought issues and working on water issues for crops and livestock, particularly crops. You've visited with Jonathan Aguilar a time or two about his ongoing work in southwest Kansas. So that's just one example. So it's a story that's lasted longer than it should have, this latest rendition of drought. But we're going to deal with that and water issues for some time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll see the repercussions of this, like you said, for potentially years to come, especially when we think about the cattle market specifically. My background, I think of that a lot of the times, and we'll see that for quite a while, unfortunately, I think.
Forage production's a big part of it, too. We've seen how difficult that's been for folks who are stuck in drought areas. Let's hope our good friend Chip Redmond can bring us better news and that we can turn the tide and get an El Nino in here sometime soon.
I think another event that I'll think of a lot is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's been a global story for sure, but it's also been one that's deeply touched Kansas specifically, because we've had a faculty member here at K-State, Antonina Broyaka, that's been updating us because she personally is connected to Ukraine.
She has family still in Ukraine. Her husband is still there, and she has been bringing those on a regular basis, those updates with a direct perspective, because she is from an agricultural college in Ukraine. Her vantage points on what this means, what's happening in Ukraine, has been very valuable information. Of course, she's based in the agricultural economics department currently at K-State. This thing has sort of fallen from the limelight in recent months, and that's part of the news cycle mentality that we seem to have in this country anymore. It's no less important today than it was back in March and April. And so one would expect that we'll feel the repercussions of the Ukraine situation for a while. Let's hope for a rapid resolution as soon as possible to the betterment of the folks who have been afflicted by this. And let's hope that the interruptions in the food supply can be healed as quickly as possible. But that's something that's not going to be healed immediately, because the damage has been done to Ukrainian agriculture. They'll bounce back whenever this thing ends, but it's going to be a while.
Antonina mentioned in her most recent update that a lot of the land that has been agricultural land for a very long time now has been almost ruined in a lot of ways, and it's going to take a long time to recover from this, not only in terms of that, but, we also think of the global impact of that situation, and we've seen a lot of that here in the United States in terms of input prices for things like fertilizer, which of course is always a concern.
That's been probably the second biggest story locally behind the drought, although you can tie them all together. It's stunning how much input costs have gone up. Fuel prices are starting to ease some, but certainly crop inputs, fertilizer being primary among those, although there are others that have gone up. It's a good thing that commodity prices have reached the heights that they have sustained for a while now, or else our folks out there would really be in a world of hurt. It's already difficult. And the availability, not mentioning the price, the availability of product is still something to be worked through. I've not talked with anybody directly about that and where we stand on that going into spring of 2023, but that's going to have to be watched very carefully. Thankfully, our producers understand risk management and are astute in working through these issues, and doesn't make it any easier for them that we do have high input costs. But hopefully they can manage their way through this in a way that will be sustainable beyond 2022 and well into 2023 and beyond. We'll see. It's not easy when you have fertilizer going at $1,200, $1,300 a ton.
Absolutely. And I wanted to end our conversation today on something specifically K-State focused. Sure. And I think our biggest news story for K-State and us here in research and extension at K-State is probably the addition of our 15th president here at the university. So President Linton joined our team this year.
Full disclosure here, I was at my computer last fall in my office watching as they announced the new president of Kansas State University. Nobody, at least nobody externally, knew who that was. They had that presentation at Forum Hall in the Student Union, and when they introduced the new president of K-State, who was previously the dean of the College of Agriculture at North Carolina State University, I did hand springs in my office because the minute it was understood that we had a new president who had an agricultural familiarity and background, I thought that was the best thing that's happened to the College of Agriculture and K-State's agricultural presence for years and years and years. He's been very good about, as Dr. Linton, fleshing out the needs of the university in a broad context. It most assuredly has been aggressive in looking into the agricultural needs that the university can serve going forward. He's hit the ground slowly trotting, but soon to run as he's done his due diligence and getting that feedback going around the state, talking with stakeholders, learning more about what agriculture really needs and what K-State's place in that is. That is just a tremendous advance for agriculture in the state as well as the university itself. I am very enthused to see where his presidency is going to take K-State in the immediate years ahead, because it's going to move pretty fast, it sounds.
Absolutely, and he's tackled it all with genuine excitement, it seems, as well, which is so exciting to hear.
That's the word right there. It's genuine. That's my take anyway. Very genuinely committed to agriculture and its purpose, and K-State's purpose in serving that industry. I don't think there's any doubt about that being genuine, and I'm very, very encouraged by where that's going to potentially go.
Eric, I can't thank you enough for coming in today. You were such a key role, a key voice in so many listeners' lives for so long, so I hope they've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to serve again. I mentioned that my last day on the air back in June. I'm also gratified to know that we have brought somebody in who has taken the ball and run with it very, very well in Samantha Bennett. So that gives me great ease to know that this thing is in good hands, and keep up the good work, Samantha.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Eric. Once again, that was Eric Atkinson, the former voice of Agriculture Today, joining us for a conversation on the biggest stories of 2022. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. Invasive bush honeysuckle is a problem for homeowners and native habitats. Bush honeysuckles will invade a wide variety of natural communities with or without previous disturbances. And because bush honeysuckles form a thick understory, they limit how much sunlight reaches the seedlings of native plants, inhibiting their growth. K-State horticulturist Ward Upham says that fall is the best time to control this invasive bush. Ward, one of the things we hear about is bush honeysuckles, and I think what we first think of is, ooh, what am I going to do with that?
That's right. These are a shrub that is considered invasive. It's not considered noxious in Kansas, but it is causing some real problems, especially in the eastern third of Kansas. Can occur all across the state, but the eastern third have better growing conditions for it.
How do we identify this?
Actually, it's not too hard. It's the shrub that keeps its leaves, green leaves, later in the fall and greens up earlier in the spring than any other shrub. Also, it often has bright red berries. So if you have something like that, you probably got bush honeysuckle. And it's going to be in areas like right around the edges of forests, can be in pastures, can be in roadsides, or underneath other trees. If it's the middle of the forest, probably won't see it. But if you have enough light hitting the ground, you'll see it under other trees.
And I'm assuming this is something we want to take care of.
It is, because since it has green leaves longer in the season and it's more invasive, it can crowd out some of our native plants. And so we want to get rid of it if we can. These are Asian honeysuckles, and so they are not native.
And they spread quickly?
They can. Those seeds, birds like them. They're going to carry them, and then so it can pop up some distance away from any other bush honeysuckle. And so, yeah, it can be a real problem.
What's the best control method then? What should we be doing?
There's a number of ways to control it. If you have new seedlings coming up, one thing to look for is they have opposite leaves. A lot of our shrubs have alternate leaves, where it's a stair-step pattern. Opposite leaves, those leaves are directly across from each other. So if young seedlings coming up and those leaves are green later in the fall, if you have moist soil, you can just pull up the seedlings. You're not going to do that with a larger shrub, but you can do that with the younger ones. If it's a older planting, then you're probably going to be looking at some sort of chemical control. For example, you can do a cut stump treatment. A lot of people use glyphosate, such as Roundup, That's non-selective. It's going to kill whatever it hits, but it does work as a cut stump treatment. It's not taken up by the roots. So that can be either a foliar application before you cut the stump, or after you cut the stump, you can use a 25% glyphosate solution, and that works really well. If it's just spraying the leaves, then just the regular 2% solution will work really well for that. Just remember that it's going to kill whatever it hits, but not taken up by roots. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. But there are other ways to control them as well. For example, you can use a product with triclopyr. That would be things like Garlon or Remedy. There are a number of other trade names for that. And you can treat the cut stumps with that as well. You can also use Pechlorum or Tordon. The only thing with Tordon is you can have some flashback with that. It can be taken up by the roots of other plants and damage them. Some people get away with it and some people don't, so you have to be really careful with that. There is an excellent publication on how to control this and how to identify it. It's from the Kansas Forest Service, and it's called Economical Control of Bush Honeysuckle. And if you do a search for that and then add the term Kansas, you'll be able to find it. And so that gives you all the information you need to do a good job of controlling this shrub.
If you cut the shrub, how do you discard what you've cut?
You can just throw it away wherever. I mean, you can even make a brush pile. It's not going to cause that part to start to grow. The other thing you can do is a basal treatment with the Remedy or the Garlon, the triclopyr products. Just spray around the base of that plant. You don't have to cut it off, and that will soak in. Probably a good idea to use some sort of oil or diesel to mix it with so that it'll soak into that bark and kill it that way.
The quicker you get to this, the better, right?
That's right. So it doesn't get out of control. And so if you just have a plant or two, it's a good idea to get rid of it now instead of waiting until you have a larger population.
That's K-State horticulturist Ward Upham with information on control methods for bush honeysuckle. The publication he mentioned is available from the Kansas Forest Service. To learn more, go to kansasforests.org. And to round out this segment of Agriculture Today, Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond has some tips for staying safe this winter, whether you're trying to stay warm outdoors, traveling, or shoveling snow. Chip, when we think about winter weather safety, what's maybe the first thing that comes to your mind?
First thing that comes to my mind for winter weather safety is just the cold. It brings with it different dangers. Your bodies just aren't prepared to take cold for long periods of time. And just as we can in summer get heat illness if we're exposed too long, same comes for winter, is if we don't prepare and dress properly, the cold can quickly have negative results, especially when we factor in the wind and look at the wind chill. It can have big-time impacts to our body and result in frostbite and hypothermia pretty quickly.
And really, it can be just a matter of minutes in some cases.
Yeah, especially as we get colder and we add more wind, you can get down to less than minutes even when we start talking about the sub-zero temperatures. And so it's a trend downward. So the temperatures near 30 degrees and wind are not as severe as, say, negatives. And that's why we look at things like schools getting closed once temperatures drop typically below zero or below negative 10 wind chills. We start to see much, much higher risk as a result. You know, the body releases a lot of its heat to your head. So stocking cap goes a long way to keep that heat in and keeps the overall ambient temperature of your body warmer. And then really appendages, things like your fingers and toes are most exposed and can cool off the quickest, and therefore they're usually the first thing that get damaged with cold weather. So mittens go a long ways because gloves still release that heat throughout the finger and allow more of that cold air to go into. You get mittens, all your fingers are kept together, and they typically can stay much warmer. As a result, you don't have as big of a threat, at least in the short term, for frostbite. You know, a lot of folks are traveling for the holidays, and so if you were to end up getting a stalled vehicle or stranded for some way, shape, or form, you need to make sure that you've got the proper clothing in your vehicle to be protected when your car starts to cool off or should you have to walk. And so you want to make sure you have those kind of clothes with you, even if you don't plan to go outside, because the cold is a real threat and it will persist all winter.
What about in terms of other things that you should keep in the vehicle to keep you safe, especially, as you say, while you're traveling?
You really need a whole kit with your vehicle, especially for the winter. Things such as a snow brush or ice scraper are an obvious go-to. We have frost. It's frequent in the wintertime here, and you're not allowed to drive your vehicle if you can't see out your windows. You're also not allowed to drive a vehicle if there's snow on it. It's dangerous. It poses a hazard to other people. You need to brush all that snow off. So you should have an ice scraper in your car and a snow brush. Another thing you should keep in your car is a jump starter. This time of year, batteries are stressed. They get stressed the most when they're in cold and when they're very hot. And so as a result, we see a lot more batteries dying in vehicles. So a little jump pack that you can keep, you can usually plug them in once, charge them up, and they're good for at least one jump start. That's a great thing to have. If not that, then jumper cables go a long way as well. We talked about clothes already, and people need to have additional clothing. Blankets go a long way. They can keep you covered up if you end up getting stranded, and they can keep you warm and protected from the elements. I really recommend folks have their cell phones charged when they travel, and maybe some food. Just not like crazy dinner meals, but, some granola bars, that kind of thing go a long way. Hard to keep water in your car this time of year because it freezes up, but definitely having some sort of liquid or maybe Gatorade or something in the car would go a long ways as well.
We most likely will have to do some scooping this winter, maybe even some ice chipping on the sidewalks. Is there maybe some safer products now that we can use in terms of ice removal and snow removal?
I don't think there's too much of a safer product. Snow removal is one of the most stressful things that you can do, especially with heavy wet snow. It's very physically demanding. So snowblower, make sure your snowblowers run and are maintenance before the snowstorm comes. Not all of us have it, so a lot of us push it. But just be aware of the physical demands. One of the leading causes of wintertime heart attacks are due to the pressures from shoveling snow. And then snow can get packed. It becomes very icy, and you can't really scrape it off. And that's when you start to use salt or sand to help gain some traction in an area that might be hard to shovel or plow.
You mentioned travel before, and one of the things that I always remember someone telling me was, don't just check what the forecast is in your area. Check the forecast along the way and your final destination so you know what to expect.
Yep. Conditions in the wintertime in Kansas can change rapidly. We could have a cold front come through, drop that temperature 50 degrees in a couple hours. It's definitely feasible, and as well as snow. We can go from clear skies to heavy snow very quickly. As a result, I really encourage people to know the forecast and also just check the road conditions. CanDrive, that's KANDRIVE.org, is the KDOT website to look at road conditions across the state and to assess if they're seasonal or if they're snow-covered or snow-packed. Additionally, you can also look at the webcams, too, to actually see the road conditions yourself. And then be aware of potential road closures. Kansas is a windy state. We throw some wind with some light snow on the ground. It could even be as much as less than an inch of snow on the ground. If we have 30, 40-mile-an-hour winds, it's going to blow, and it's going to move, and it's going to drift. It's going to make travel very challenging. And as a result, it's going to greatly deteriorate conditions, especially in the western half of the state. So as a result, a lot of times, roads get closed. I-70 will get closed at some point this winter. And just be prepared for those closings, and you'll know them in advance by checking CanDrive, and then you'll also be able to at least not get stuck on that exit where everyone's being forced off the road.
That's Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond with tips for staying safe this winter. This is the K-State Radio Network. You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. For many years, producers have used a forage system that measured two different types of fiber, NDF and ADF. Essentially an estimate of how much hay cows would eat and how much energy they would get from that hay. Those two values were then combined to get an overall estimate of forage quality that was called RFV, or relative feed value. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that RFV has some limitations. However, a newer test, RFQ, relative forage quality, does a very good job of measuring digestible fiber in grassy hays, alfalfa, and other legumes. Mike has more in this week's Milk Lines.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning how they evaluate their forages. As we look at different ways to evaluate forages, many of us still use relative feed value when we're purchasing alfalfa hay, or maybe some other forages as well. Relative feed value has been with us for decades, and originally it was designed to actually put a value on different lots of alfalfa hay. And actually, relative feed value, if you're looking at just pure alfalfa hay, actually does a fairly decent job of sorting those hays that are of higher value in your dairy herd to those that are lower in value to your dairy herd. So when we think about relative feed value, it's really only based on two numbers. It's based on the ADF and the NDF content found in the forage that you have tested. So many of our labs, that's a standard analysis that they run. And again, many times we do this with near-infrared reflectance, so our NIR. Very common, and it's very reasonable to get a sample tested based on relative feed value. However, doesn't really tell the whole story about the forage. As we've come through the more recent decades of research when it comes to forage nutrition, we've come to realize that when we look at NDF, not all NDF is created equal. In other words, some of the NDF is more available to your animals than others. So NDF digestibility is an important factor to take into consideration as we look at the relative value of a forage for your dairy herd. Now, there's another term that came along about 20 years ago that it really has not been adopted very quickly that probably would do a better job of describing our forages than RFV, and that is RFQ. RFQ actually takes into account the total digestible nutrients found in that forage. So it's a superior measure of whether or not your animals will be able to get full value out of the forages that you're purchasing. Today, many of our laboratories, if they report RFV, they also report RFQ. Sometimes it'll cost you maybe a few more dollars for the test, but it's important that you think about doing this if you're actually feeding it to lactating dairy cows. If we're feeding this forage to dry cows or maybe even in our transition pen, it may not be as much of a factor in determining whether or not we should pay more for the forage or less. Another thing that you might think about in terms of balancing rations is you have forages that are higher in RFQ, they're going to move through the animal a little bit quicker, so rate of passage will increase. So as you look at buying forages and as you talk to hay dealers or other people that you purchase forage from, particularly if you're buying forages that are mixed alfalfa and grass or alfalfa and another forage or maybe even a clover or some other legume and grass, really important that you consider using RFQ as your major determining factor for pricing rather than RFV. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a closer look at how you're evaluating the forages that you're purchasing.
Thanks, Mike. For more information on RFV or RFQ, contact your local county or district extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.